Genesis 50 and 20. But as for you, and this is Joseph speaking to his brothers. I'll read the scripture and I'll explain it to you. You meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, in order to bring it about as it is this day, to save many people alive. We know the story of Joseph, but if you'll bear with me for a minute, I'm going to go over it again real quick. We know Joseph was the youngest of his brethren. And Joseph was the type of guy, I gather, that might have been a tattletale on his brothers. Did anybody have younger brothers and sisters like this? My brother would blackmail me. I mean, if you don't take me with you, I'm telling mom what you did. Oh, Lord. Don't ever give your sibling, the younger one, any power over you. Has anybody experienced that before? And that's basically, I believe, what happened here. It says in the Bible that Joseph would go out and spy on his brothers. And then he would come back and give an evil report of what his brothers were doing. More than likely, his brothers would be hanging out in the field and kind of not working, kind of just hanging around. And so he would bring an evil report. And so his brothers decided that, hey, let's get rid of him. And even one of them wanted to kill him, and only one actually defended him. Don't kill him, let's sell him. And so Joseph goes through things throughout his life that is totally unbelievable. This poor kid would have to suffer. And so Joseph then is sold as a slave by your own family. Now, I don't know if you can picture this in your mind, is that your own family sells you into slavery. And so Joseph goes into slavery. And while Joseph goes into slavery, he is blessed by being able to serve in Potiphar's house. And so he ends up sold to Potiphar. And so now Joseph sees a little, I talked about Joseph a bunch, but this is applicable to my sermon. And so Joseph then starts serving Potiphar. And while he's serving Potiphar, he tries to be the most upright person he can possibly be in this house. And we know that Joseph also one day goes into Potiphar's house. And Potiphar's wife called him in there. And Potiphar's wife decided she desired Joseph. And she wanted to commit adultery with Joseph. Now, Joseph, being an honorable man, would not do this thing. He said, look, my master has gave me control of everything in this house, and I have everything here except for you. That you're one thing I'm not allowed to have. And so this can't happen. So she screams that he tried to rape her. And by some miracle, instead of him being killed, he is put into jail. Now, I have speculation on that, on what actually happened. I believe that maybe some of the people and the men or Potiphar knew that his wife was like this, because it should have been accused of rape or attempted rape would have been death. So now I want you to picture now what's happened to Joseph. He gets a little bit of peace in his life. I'm giving you a picture of your life, if you'll pay attention. And he gets a little bit of blessing in his life. And the next thing you know, he's thrown into prison, into jail for something he has never did. He spends quite a few years there in jail. And one day we know that the baker and the butler came down, and the cupbearer, if you want to call him that, came down one day, and they were both in trouble by Pharaoh. And so Pharaoh says, we need somebody to interpret these dreams. And so Joseph is brought out of, the baker and the cupbearer go down and starts telling Joseph what has happened. Joseph has told their dreams. Joseph interprets their dreams. And Joseph says, remember me. When you get out of here, remember me. Let the Pharaoh know that I should not even be in this jail. But it plainly says they forgot him. They forgot him. All that Joseph had did for them forgot him. 2 more years he spends in jail because of what his brothers had done many years before. And while he is sitting in jail, he wonders to himself, how could God have brought me to this place? How in the world can I love God and have been sold by my brothers, been taken as slave, falsely accused, put into prison, and now I said, and I've just helped out a couple other men, and now they don't even mention me to Pharaoh, and here I have to set more. And so he sits there, and the next thing you know, he is made the second ruler of the whole world because he can interpret dreams. He appears before Pharaoh, and Pharaoh says, what should we do since a famine is coming up on the land? There's going to be plenty for 7 years. There's going to be famine for 7 years. What is it that I need to do? And so he said, you need to find out an honorable man, somebody you can trust to look over the affairs of these so that you may save your people alive when this happens. And so now Joseph becomes a king. But I believe with all my heart that Joseph still had a struggle in his heart. And some of us have struggles in our heart over people that have betrayed us. We have struggles in our heart because somebody did something to us when we was a little kid. Some of us had stuff done to us by our first husbands, our first wives. Awful things done, betrayed, cheated on, lied on, and all these things just like Joseph did. And we know that we see here what happens is Joseph's brothers become starving. And now they become hungry and they have to go to Egypt to get some food. And Joseph is there dialing out the portion of food to people. Now, to make all this story a little bit shorter, is we know that at this point, Jacob finds out that his son is still alive. And we know that his brothers come and they all move in to Egypt. And while they're in Egypt, the next thing you know, Jacob dies. Now, this is where this scripture, Genesis 50, comes into place. In Genesis 50, you read here, but as for you, because his brothers are nervous, they're going to kill him. He is going to kill us now. Father is dead. He deserves justice against us. But listen to what he said. You meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. What my message to you today is the things that have happened to you in your life. The bad things, the betrayals, the complete horrendous things that you've had to go through. The devil meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. See, who could imagine what God's plan was in this? Do you believe that it was God's plan for Joseph to be betrayed? No, but what I do believe is God turned that into his plan. You don't know what happened to you in your life, how God will turn that into good. You have no clue. I've got to tell you a couple more stories till you can get this. If you look at, go into Egypt, and you look at the story of Moses and you study this out, you'll find out that the Pharaoh, now according to history, it's not your word, but according to history, the soothsayers had told the king that there's a deliverer coming. And so that's not in your Bible, but that is in history. And they said the deliverer is coming, and we know all the firstborn children died. How would you like to live during that time and thought to yourself, how is this possible? And even Moses' mom still suffered because Moses' mom says, you know what? I can't keep the kid. I'm going to put him in this ark. I'm going to put him out on the Nile River and let him float downstream. And while he's floating downstream, who takes possession of him? Egypt. What about turning your child over would essentially be to the devil? To the devil. And think how God works this out. God works this out, gets Moses rescued. Moses then grows up in the court of Egypt. Moses at 40 years old goes out and spies his brethren and sees what they're going through and what they're living through. The Bible says he didn't want to enjoy the pleasures of sin of Egypt for a season, but went out and lived with his own people. So while he's out with his own people at 40 years old, he starts defending his own people. And so Moses is betrayed by his own people, and you're saying, where? How did that happen? Because when he killed the Egyptian, his own people had relayed the message to Pharaoh that it was Moses that had done it, and Pharaoh started seeking Moses' life. I'd missed that scripture till this week. And so they are now looking to kill Moses. So Moses does a good thing. Moses is trying to defend the children of God. Moses decided to neglect the things that are of the world. And he says, I'm going to serve God and I'm going to live with his people. And the next thing you know, Moses is put to the backside of the wilderness for 40 years. And there he suffers in the heat. There he suffers the sandstorms. There he suffers everything. He's raised as a great general in the army of up Pharaoh. And now he's to the backside of the wilderness, dealing with all the dirt and the filth and the heat and everything that it could possibly be harsh. And at 80 years old, God calls him to go deliver the children out of Egypt. So he's called by God to free God's people. Who can imagine that what Moses went through for 40 years and all those children dying that died in Egypt that Pharaoh killed would going to turn out to good, One more story here. Ruth. If you look at Ruth, and maybe you can connect with this story. If you can't connect with the first stories, Ruth takes up with a woman by the name of Naomi. Naomi marries to some Moabites. The Moabite men and the sons, that's a whole family together. How would you like to live in this situation? You think you've got a bad situation in your life. This is a horrible situation. So you got Naomi and her Ruth, who is her daughter-in-law. And the first thing that happens is Ruth's father-in-law dies. Then her brother-in-law dies. Then her husband dies. She has no children. This is meaningless to you today. But back then, if you didn't have no children and you'd been with a man, you basically had to beg for food the rest of your life. And so what happened is you would say to yourself, why is it that God did this to me? Ruth could have said this. Ruth could have said, ever since I've started serving this God, I have left the heathen gods. I've started worshiping this God. He's supposed to be the God of everything there is. And what has happened now is my father-in-law's dead, my brother-in-law's dead, and my own husband is dead. I have nothing left. And so, but she says this. She says that I'm going to worship your God. I'm going to hang out with your people, no matter what has happened. And God blessed her with Boaz, who is in the lineage of Jesus Christ. So you're saying, how in the world, this is how God works, church? Now I'm trying to get through to you to tell you these stories, and maybe you can relate to one of them. This is how God does stuff. You don't know what's happening in your life. You think everything has been bad. I feel like this all the time. If you hang around with me, you'll find out. This week, 3rd-degree burns from some freak accident of boiling water pouring all over my hands. It's a miracle that I only have this one bad place. It was boiling, raging hot, blisters that high. It was awful. But what I'm trying to say is that when you go through all these hardships, have you been through any hardships? It says everybody in here had a blissful life, or if you have been through some bad times. Have you been betrayed? Have you been forsaken? Have you been forgotten? Have you been just broken in absolute pieces and you think there's nothing good possibly going to come out of this? This is what God is trying to tell us through Joseph today. That a lot of times people do things to you that are evil, but God turns them around to good. If you look at Jesus, what good could possibly come out of Jesus, our salvation? Betrayed by his own people. His own people, the called children of God, betrayed. Judas betrays him, seeing all the miracles and stuff. Imagine how brokenhearted Jesus was. All these, even at the Garden of Gethsemane, he is crying out, my God, why have you forsaken me? Has anybody ever said that? Have you asked him why you have forsaken me? Do you know David said that? Do you know Jesus cried that? But I'm saying to you today that no matter what evil that has befallen you in your life, God turns it around for good. The reason I wanted to go through these elaborate stories is so you can see that it's impossible to figure out what God's plan is and how his plan is going to work out. I say unto you today that if I'd have been Naomi, I wouldn't have understood this plan. I might have shaken my faith. What about when you was Job? What happens if you lose all your children, all your camels, all your donkeys, all your food, all your tents, and all your kids in one day? In one day. That sounds horrible, doesn't it? And we find out, a lot of people say, well, why did God run Job through that? God didn't even think of that. God was just proud of Job. It was Satan that wanted to bring on the trials and tribulations. It was Satan wanting things to go wrong. It was Satan wanting them to curse God and die. That's why Satan left his wife to live. It's because she had had enough. And she was ready to curse God and die. And even told her husband, curse God and die. Get this over with. But you see the end result that God had. To this day, every discouraged person on the planet will be studying whom? Job. How he got through it. How he lived through it. Sometimes we don't understand what God is doing, and I understand that. I don't either. But you'll find out that good comes from what is going wrong. You'll find out that no matter what it looks like, no matter what it tastes like, no matter what it seems like, that God is working it out for our good. When Jesus goes and he's rejected in his own hometown. Or what about Mary when her son is killed, John the Baptist? All the way through history, you will find this complete pattern of behavior. I could have used David as an example. I could have used all kinds of people in the Bible as an example. But God has a great plan. And his plan is for good. Even though bad, you would say to Naomi, Naomi, how is it that these things have happened? Well, I can tell you that God wanted to bless them both, but he didn't want to bless them in that land. He wanted to bless them in another land. He wanted to bless them in the land of God. So sometimes God will turn your world upside down in order to accomplish what his goal is. I can tell you, and we talked about this past 2 weeks, and I'll talk about it again. I'll talk about it every week. The things that go wrong and go bad, there's two kinds of people. There's people that run away from God, and there's people that run into his arms. Now you got people like David who run to the arms of God when trouble came. Even when he made a mistake, he ran to the arms of God. And so as the enemy's trying to destroy David and ruin him, and David even at one point takes up with the enemy. Did you guys know this? He went and lived with the Philistines, the people he's trying to kill. And he's rejected there. The king says, man, this would be a good guy to have around. And everyone around him said, if you leave him here, he'll see his people being hurt. He'll become like a bear robbed of her whelps, and he will rip us all to shreds. They were terrified of David. But still, David had to run for his life from Saul. Running from it, running. Never had a dad. His dad is embarrassed of him when they have a dinner. Doesn't even call him in to make his brothers make fun of him his whole life. You see what I'm trying to get at. And God makes him a king. Makes him a king. His dad didn't want him. His brothers didn't want him. Then he takes up with Saul. And he thinks there's my new father figure of Saul. And Saul tries to kill him. And he loved him. And you're saying, what is God doing all this? There's no question. This is why David writes, my God, why have you forsaken me? What have I done that you have brought me here? What have I done? Some of you are asking the same thing. What did I do to deserve this? What have I done in my life? Are you bringing my past sins up to me in my face? Have you not forgiven my sin? And it has nothing to do with your sin. What it has to do is that God is much bigger than what you're going through and what didn't work out and what didn't go right. And he's bigger than this. This is where faith comes in. This is why Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, and I'll tell you, this is hard to say. I'm learning to say it. But how many say this when you're praying on your face and crying out to God, God, not my will be done. You say, God, deliver me from this hour. But then you're like, got to be like Christ and finally say, but not my will be done. Your will be done. Amen.